Before we start today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. The content in this podcast is for general reference and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be complete or exhaustive or to be applicable to any specific individual's medical condition. No information provided in this podcast constitutes medical advice and is not an attempt to practice medicine or to provide specific medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast does not create a physician-patient relationship and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please do not rely on this podcast for emergency medical treatment. Remember that everyone is different, so make sure you consult your own healthcare professional before seeking any new treatment and before you alter, suspend, or initiate a new change in your routine. Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Sheets,
two internal medicine doctors who spent years practicing traditional primary care. Over time, we realized something was missing from modern healthcare. A real understanding of how everyday lifestyle choices impact overall health.
We'll help you cut through the noise of the countless health influencers and their conflicting opinions. Because no matter who you follow, the basics of lifestyle medicine are at the heart of it all.
Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Sheets.
So today we are going to be talking about nutrition. Yay!
We're so excited!
We have a million things we want to say about nutrition, so we are going to try to stay focused and not get too derailed, but we want to apologize in advance that this may be a long one. We do hope that this is one that maybe you can come back to if you want to be reminded of some nutrition basics, and it can be a reference for you in the future. But we're hoping to really define the terms around processed food. I know we've mentioned trying to minimize ultra-processed food already, so we want to help you understand what is ultra-processed and whether or not something is processed or ultra-processed and if that's bad or not. And then we're going to use the rest of the time to go through food labels, and we'll go through ingredients and everything that's on the nutrition label and then talk about those things in detail. So we really hope that after listening today, you can feel more confident when you're navigating through the grocery store and feel confident about what you're putting into your body. So just a side note here, too. I just got back from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine conference, which was amazing and got me very excited about things. And I am wearing my shirt that I got there, which has peas on it.
I did not attend this year, but the last year I did attend, I bought a shirt with blueberries, and I'm wearing mine today. So we're having our nutrition focus even in our clothing today. So we are very passionate and excited to bring this show to you all, and hopefully you can walk away with a little bit more education on what you need to know when you're in the grocery store.
We're going to start out by talking about the NOVA food classification system, and that's the official classification of what you hear us talking about with processed, unprocessed, ultra-processed, all of that.
They're a little bit boring to talk about these definitions, but we wanted to review them just so in future shows when we're talking about these different types of foods and where they fall in this classification, you understand what we're actually meaning by that. The first one, which I like to talk about a lot, is Group 1, which is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. These are food items that are literally a single word. I think that's the best way to describe that. So they are unprocessed plants or animals that have not been altered in any way. So a potato, a carrot, apple, eggs. Now, minimally processed means the foods may have been cleaned or frozen or even ground. Inedible parts are removed. It could be fermented. So parts may have been taken away, but nothing at all has been added to the food. Not a single additional ingredient. Not any seasoning, no oils. And some examples of a minimally processed would be a dried fruit that had nothing added, or frozen vegetables, or frozen meat or ground beef. And when we use the word whole foods, a lot of times we're referring to this Group 1 and trying to make sure we're increasing these simple foods into our diet. So when we say a lot of that whole foods and we need to optimize those in our diet, a lot of times we're referring to this Group 1 as well as Group 2, which I'll let Kitty define.
Yeah, and also a lot of these Group 1 foods, these unprocessed foods, don't even have labels. So if something doesn't have a label, that's probably a sign that it is unprocessed. Okay, so Group 2 is processed culinary ingredients, and what that means is it's something that's been extracted from a natural food by pressing or grinding or crushing. And so these are things that typically you use to cook food, but that you wouldn't eat by themselves. So things like olive oil, butter, salt, honey, coconut oil, these are things you would use to cook those unprocessed foods.
That leads us into the next group, which is processed foods. Again, group 3 is processed foods, not ultra-processed foods. These are different, so be sure that you're aware of that. Group 3 is when you are taking group 1 and group 2 and putting them together. And so you're taking your whole foods and you're adding just a little bit of seasoning or salt to the food item. So this would be something like canned beans or canned meat, salted nuts, a tomato paste, some freshly made cheese, or homemade bread.
Yeah, and so specifically, I think bread's a great example. So this would be homemade bread, like the kind of bread that if you don't eat in a couple days, it's going to have mold on it.
Exactly.
So that is processed foods, and processed foods are great. There are some that are not the most healthy, but in general, you don't need to worry as much about the processed foods. We need some amount of processing to make foods stable and shelf stable, and we need those in our pantry as well.
And a lot of time when we're cooking at home, we're putting these food items together and ends up falling in this group 3. It's not necessarily things that we're buying from the store, but we're combining a lot of group 1 with group 2 to make a recipe.
Yeah, and so what we make might be a processed food, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So don't equate that with not being healthy. As opposed to group 4, which is the ultra-processed foods. And the ultra-processed foods are more of a industrial formulation of food that's taken substances and extracted things from food. So it's extracted oils, fats, sugars, proteins, and then it's re-modified the food and put it back together with other things, and a lot of them are synthesized things from the lab and have put all these things back together to make them taste incredible and to make you want more. And often you don't even recognize the whole food that was a big component of that to begin with, so that the actual group 1 food is pretty much unrecognizable once it's had all of these things happen to it to become an ultra-processed food.
And in general, many food companies have put so many ingredients in there to make them so palatable that they have even become addictive to many people because of the taste and all the different items that have been placed in there, that it's almost unnatural for our taste buds, and it makes us crave them even more. Now, what are some examples of these foods that we're talking about? This is packaged breads, buns, muffins, granola bars, donuts, cereal,
hot dogs, chicken nuggets, fish sticks, any of those frozen dinners, even things like flavored yogurt. You may think you're making a good decision with yogurt with a fruit, but even those flavored yogurts are ultra-processed. All of the salty treats, chips, crackers, all of those things are ultra-processed.
And one of the best ways to figure out, hey, is this item ultra-processed, is just looking at the ingredient list. And how many ingredients are there? Do you even recognize all the items on the ingredient list? That's a quick way you can recognize something as ultra-processed just because of the terminology on the ingredient list.
Right. So just kind of taking you through a whole ingredient and how that goes from unprocessed to ultra-processed. If we take an apple itself is unprocessed whole food, and then it can be minimally processed if it's just made into applesauce at home, not a store-bought applesauce, but you make an applesauce at home. And then processed if you were to turn that applesauce into baked apples at home, added a little bit of sugar and cinnamon and all that stuff and made them baked apples, or made your own apple pie from scratch. That would be a processed version of an apple. And then an ultra-processed would be that apple tart that's on the shelf and lasts for many, many months. One thing about Sarah is that she loves ChatGPT. And she has turned me on to asking ChatGPT questions. And so when I was thinking about this talk today, I actually asked ChatGPT about certain foods and whether or not they were processed or ultra-processed. And it did a great job explaining it. So if you are really unsure and you want to really find out whether something is processed or ultra-processed, you could probably Google it. You can ask ChatGPT, and it gave a good explanation of how that particular thing could be processed in a version maybe that you made from home and how the one on the shelf would be ultra processed. So soup, for instance, if you made a chicken and vegetable soup at home, that's processed versus if you buy it in the can already altogether shelf stable, then that's ultra processed. The ChatGPT can actually explain that to you pretty well.
Taking advantage of some technology. Usually I stray away from it, but in this situation, it can actually be helpful at times. And another big processed food group that I always like to address is talking about processed meats and understanding those, because that one can be a little confusing of what falls under the processed meat. Now, when we talk about a chicken breast or ground beef, those, depending on where you get them or whatnot, they are typically not ultra processed. But when we talk about processed meat food items like bacon, sausage, ham, hot dog, salami, and deli meats, these are not meat in their actual whole form. And if you look at the ingredient list when you purchase any of these, you will see that there is a lot of different items that are on that nutrition label. And so that, again, is a hint that, hey, this is an ultra-processed food, and these food items specifically have really high amounts of salt. They are really high in saturated fats. Some of them have nitrates, which many processed food companies are trying to give options that have less of that, but still we're not quite there. And there's lots of chemical additives, colorings, preservatives, etc. And this bucket is been shown to increase risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and colorectal cancer. So that's something to keep in mind, that specific bucket of one that if you're trying to figure out where can I reduce ultra-processed foods and focus on first, this would be a bucket to tackle to begin with.
Yeah, and I want to make sure you heard, Sarah, I think a lot of people have heard about the effect of processed meat and increased colorectal cancer risk, but one that had surprised me before I studied lifestyle medicine was actually the increased risk of diabetes, because I think a lot of people, when they're worried about diabetes and worried about controlling their sugar, often lean in toward increasing their meat intake and minimizing some of their other carbohydrates. And that's not necessarily a good thing to do. So you do want to minimize those refined carbs if you have diabetes or you're at risk for diabetes, but you want to avoid these processed meats as well, because that's also increasing your risk.
When you are making choices, trying to pick those whole food options over the hot dogs or having a daily sandwich with deli meat, etc. Those are easy flips, so you understand what are going to be a healthier option in order to do that. One tip I've learned from Kitty, and because I'm not one, I love going to the grocery store and spending all the time. My husband doesn't love it, but I love spending a lot of time in the grocery store staring at things. And one of the easiest ways to learn about these items and looking at ingredient lists and trying to find some of the best options for you to put in your cart is using the app to do a click list item. And because all those quick grocery click list options, you can see your nutrition label as you are ordering the food. And so this is a great way to build a repertoire and slowly change some of the food items that you're buying on a regular basis. So I'll let Kitty talk more about how she uses this in her daily life, but it is a great option when you're trying to figure out what to buy, but also might be in a little bit more of a time crunch that you can't do it while you're in the grocery store.
Yeah, so that can let you have some time if you're sitting in a line somewhere or something and you want to just start looking through some of the labels of things that you often buy. You can see all of that. Kroger is a big store here where we are in Lexington, so I use the Kroger app a lot, but it's on almost all of the...
Oh, yes.
the stores where you would be buying groceries. So take some time and just look at what you have normally been buying. And it's a great way to see those nutrition labels and have time without standing in the aisle, especially if you've got other people with you and they don't want to stand there and look at the nutrition labels with you forever. So take advantage of those. And just to kind of go back to this meat for a minute. So to make it a little bit more clear, like what we're suggesting, if you're someone that loves a sandwich, is if you can use fresh turkey or fresh chicken breast as opposed to ham or corned beef or pastrami or something like that, that is going to be better for you in the long run. If you are someone that likes to have deli meat or likes to have sandwiches regularly, if you can put some chicken breast in the crock pot on Sunday and then you have that to use in a sandwich or a wrap throughout the week for your lunch, that would be a better route than going for some of these processed meat options that do save you time, but you can figure out out ways to do it where it's not costing you a lot of time too. Okay, so probably a lot more that we could talk about in regards to processed meat and what's been found to be a risk associated with that, and kind of what the controversies are, and what people argue for and against that as far as how concerned we should be. So we will definitely touch more on that in the future. But for now, yeah, if you can go for a fresh meat option, fresh ground beef, fresh chicken, that kind of thing, that would be what we would encourage you to try to do. Okay, I think we've probably exhausted this topic of...
We get very passionate about that one specifically, but we really want to tackle this nutrition label with you all today. So we're going to break down. If you're listening and by chance you have a food item that has a nutrition fact label in front of you, just grab it so you can look at it with us as we go over the different parts of this label. It may help you follow along easy that way. I feel like so many people don't even know what to do with the information on a nutrition facts label. So since that is so common in our life, we figured this would be a great way to just do some overall education about nutrition. So when we're looking at the ingredients on a nutrition label for a food item, it can get overwhelming because there's so many things that you feel like you have to understand or know, and what's good, what's bad. And I hate using that terminology in general, but I think I'm going to give an example to try to help you understand what we're talking about when we are suggesting that you pick ingredients that you understand and know what they are. So an example I have here is I have an RX bar, which is a common bar that you can find in the grocery store. It technically is an ultra-processed food, but it has a lower amount of ingredients. So I'm reading from the ingredient list: dates, egg whites, cashews, almonds, chocolate, cocoa, natural flavors, sea salt. That has very few ingredients. It does have the word natural flavors, which isn't one of my favorites because we don't even know what that means. So that still stands out to me because I don't know what natural flavors is. Compared to, so that's how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ingredients. Then I also have a package of Ritz peanut butter crackers in front of me. And the ingredient list here is unbleached enriched flour, which contains wheat flour, niacin, reduced iron, thiamine mononitrate, riboflavin, folic acid, peanut butter, which is roasted peanuts, hydrogenated vegetable oil, rapeseed and cottonseed oil, salt, soybean and or canola oil, sugar, palm oil, dextrose, cornstarch, high fructose corn syrup, salt, leavening of calcium phosphate, baking soda, soy, lecithin.
I think that was more ingredients.
So that's just an example of a comparison of seeing, okay, I know that in my life I cannot reduce all quick processed food items from my pantry, and I get that. They're not all gone from mine either. But if you're trying to slowly make adjustments in the type of foods that you do carry along with you or need for that on-the-go situation as you're trying to make these changes, just trying to lean into food options that have that decreased amount of ingredients, as well as more ingredients that you know what they are than you don't know that they are.
Yeah, and one other thing we want to make sure you understand is to not rely on the front of the package. Do not trust anything that is on the front of the package. Turn it over and look at it yourself, because a lot of the things that are said on the front of the package are not regulated. So there are certain things that are, like to be certified organic. There are certain things that you have to meet to be organic. But a lot of these claims of being healthy or being lower sugar or that kind of thing, there's no standardization into what they have to do to put that on the label. So don't believe anything. Just flip it over and look at the ingredients yourself. And one other thing that the ingredient list is really helpful for is bread, because the front of the package can be really misleading. It may say the word grain or something that makes you think it's healthy. But when you flip it over, you might see the first ingredient is enriched wheat. We want that first ingredient to be whole wheat, because the whole wheat contains all the aspects of the wheat, the germ, the bran, the endosperm, all the things that are going to give you the nutrient value that you want out of whole wheat. Most breads, to make them softer and tastier, are enriched wheat. So they strip the bran and just have the endosperm left. And that is the least amount of nutrients in that part of the bread. But it's the tastiest part. So that's what that is. And then they try to put some of the nutrients back in. That's kind of the the enriched word, but it's still not the same. It's like if you were to get a wrapped gift from someone with lots of nice things inside, and then that's the whole wheat version. And then someone came and took your gift and unwrapped it, took everything out except maybe one thing, and then tried to like messily rewrap it. That's enriched flour. So we want the whole gift. We want the whole wheat flour.
And bread is its own topic of trying to figure out good options there. Hopefully in a future show we can go into more detail with that. But we just want you to, again, just be curious and start paying attention to these ingredients. And again, the easiest answer is the fewer ingredients you see, the better off you are. The first thing you see when you have a food item and you look at the nutrition facts label is the serving size. And this can be really tricky depending on the food item. Sometimes processed food or ultra-processed foods, they'll come in a package and you may think that whole package is one serving, but that's not always the case. A lot of times it may be that only half of it is a serving. So it's important to pay attention to that number one so you know the actual numbers that you're dealing with if you eat the whole item.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this before, but cereal's one, too, that the serving size that they list on there is usually less than what most people eat. So you really have to look at that serving size. If it's something that's in a pretty small package, look and see, did they include the whole packet, or do they consider this 2 servings? And then things like cereal, you want to just take the time. You don't have to do this every day. Just a couple days, measure out how much you actually eat, and then see how much of a serving that is.
And after you are looking at that, a lot of times the next thing that you see is going to be the calories of that item per serving. So if something is 2 servings, you'll have to multiply it times 2, or if it's the whole item in general, that's how many calories that are there. And then the information that gets really tricky is when we start talking about those calories in the amount of daily recommended calories, because food items can't tell you how many calories or what percent of your calories specifically is recommended, because we're all different. Everyone has different requirements. So they use the general 2,000 calories as the overall goal on a nutrition facts, but that may not be what you're actually shooting for, specifically if you're working on weight loss or if you're very active. That is just a general number that's used, so you have to be cognitive of that when you're reading the label.
Yeah. And one thing that I've changed my mind about over time, too, is I really just thought a calorie was a calorie, but that's not true. So calories are not created equal. There's a lot that goes into that, and I'm sure we will do an episode on that one day, too, when it comes to what you're trying to get out of calories. But you can kind of think of it as you have premium fuel for your car, and those are calories that really help your car, or if we're talking about calories in you, those are things that really help your body to function better. Or you can put in, you just have $2 at the gas station. You put in the cheapest gas, just $2 at a time. And that's kind of what these ultra-processed added sugar foods are doing. They're giving you a little spurt of energy, just long enough to kind of get to where you need the next spurt of energy, instead of really working to make your car function better.
And to summarize that again, we will never be saying it's all about calories in versus calories out, because each calorie and where it comes from does matter. Okay, just making sure that all of our listeners heard that.
So you will not hear us focus on calories. You should be aware of how many calories are in something. But in general, if you're focusing on what you're eating and trying to go for healthier options, you'll find yourself eating fewer calories, and calories that help fuel you, as opposed to just those ones that are getting you by for another 2 hours.
Going from there, once we go past calories on the nutrition facts label, we start seeing a lot of macronutrients as well as some micronutrients, and each of these have a percent daily value listed there. This is, again, helpful in the sense that it can give you at least an idea of if it's a lot or a little of something, but it's not 100% specific, because everyone's a little different when it comes to their needs. But you can know if something's less than 5%, that's a low amount. If something's greater than 20%, that's a pretty high amount. And you can use that for some of these things that we're going to talk about that make a big difference when you have too much or too little of them. Let me give you an example. So if we're talking about fiber and you're seeing that a food item has greater than 20% of the daily value of fiber, you know that this is a good fiber choice. Versus something, if we're talking about sodium, that we might be wanting to reduce, and you look at it and it says it's 40% daily value, that's pretty high. We don't necessarily have have specific targets for each of these that we provide education on, but you can use that as a gauge to know where it may fall.
On the label, that looks as a percentage sign and then DV. So that if you've wondered what that is, that's what that is. When it's percentage sign and then DV, that's percent daily value. So just in general, think, is this something I should be getting more of? And if it is, we want that number to be higher. If it's something you're trying to decrease in your diet, then you want that to be a lower number.
Now going into what we like to call our hot topics when it comes to a nutrition label. And we have a couple main buckets there. One of them that I'm pretty passionate about is sodium, because until you pay attention to the amount of sodium in the food that you're eating, you really have no clue how much intake you actually have. And if you've never paid attention, this is something that as Kitty always likes to say, it's time to just be observant and take a moment and see what kind of sodium intake you might have during a day. Because we know that our diet over the years has just dramatically increased in the amount of sodium that we take in.
So current guidelines recommend 2,300 milligrams of sodium or less per day. That's kind of a lot to remember, that specific number. So one way that I think is really easy to look at things is you want to look at the calories and look at the sodium in that particular thing. And so you want to keep those about equal, because we'd already said everything is usually based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet. And we're telling you to try to get 2,300 milligrams of sodium or less. So if you're staying around 2,000 calories a day, if you're keeping your sodium either matched with your calories or less, then you will be hitting that goal of staying less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day.
And just a caveat on this is there are specific health conditions out there that may provide guidance to actually have more or less sodium than this requirement or this current guideline that we're talking about. So if you have any advice from your healthcare providers that are telling you differently, please take that advice, because there are conditions that do require variation from this exact number.
Can still remember that kind of calorie and sodium guideline. So if your cardiologist or your nephrologist has given you, let's say, a guideline of 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day, then you really know you need to make sure that your sodium is less than your calories on that label if you're trying to watch that.
When I talk about sodium, one of my favorite things to discuss with people is I first like to ask, where do you think your sodium comes from? Because the number one response that I always receive is, hey, doc, I don't use a salt shaker that much. And that's when I have to pause and be like, well, we have some education to do here, because really the majority of our salt intake is not from the salt shaker. It's actually from foods when we're going out to eat, or these ultra-processed foods and packaged foods. That is where 70% of our sodium intake is coming from, not from the salt shaker.
Yeah, so it's still good to try to not oversalt your food with the salt shaker, but you can't just stop there. If you're thinking I need to reduce your sodium, or your doctor's told you that, you can't just leave it as, okay, I'll quit salting my food with the salt shaker. You really have to take the time to look at the nutrition label.
Some examples, just to give an idea, is frozen dinners are ones that have a lot of sodium. You can see up to 900 milligrams, up to 1,200 milligrams sometimes in these meals, and that is a huge chunk of your overall sodium for the day. Canned goods are something I think a lot of people are familiar there being a lot of sodium in there, specifically canned soups. But again, that daily value percentage is usually really high. You'll notice that in many canned soups, it can be anywhere 40-50% on that. And so you immediately know, my goodness, this is a lot of sodium that is in this one can.
Yeah, and then if you're putting crackers in that too, you're getting a lot of additional sodium there. So if you are eating something higher in sodium like a can of soup, really trying to hold off on adding the crackers to that, and just thinking about, can you balance that with something less processed in another meal so that you're not getting as much sodium there.
And if you do need to lean into some of those canned foods to get increase in your beans or your vegetables, one of the tips to reduce the sodium is to actually drain the fluid, rinse the item, and you're going to have a substantial drop in the sodium that the nutrition label has.
Yeah, so dump those beans out in the colander and rinse them really well. And here's just another example of looking at that calorie and sodium ratio and how to help yourself look at that. So a frozen dinner, one of the healthy ones that's classified as a healthy steamer dinner, had 130 calories, which is a really low calorie dinner, but there was 530 milligrams of sodium, 5 times as much sodium as calories. So going back to that, you want that to be more 1-to-1 there. The other thing that was surprising to me was realizing where sodium can be hidden. There are things that you know are going to have a lot of sodium that you want to get and enjoy, like chips or salted nuts. You obviously know that's got a salty taste in your mouth. That's probably high in sodium. But there are other things too. One thing that really surprised me was realizing how much sodium was in chicken breast. A lot of the manufacturers will pump the chicken breast full of an injected saltwater solution, and they say that this helps make the chicken more flavorful and make it juicier when you're cooking it. But ultimately, you may have no idea that that was pumped full of sodium. It also leaves you paying more for the chicken because now it's increased the weight of it. So paying attention to whether the chicken you're buying has been injected with a saltwater solution is helpful, I think. And it may say something like injected with chicken broth. It can still label itself as natural because these ingredients are natural and still meet the USDA's definition of natural. You can probably assume any chicken you're getting from somewhere in the service industry, from a restaurant, from a cafeteria, does have that injected solution. A lot of the chicken breast, though, I saw just like as fresh chicken breast at Kroger did not. So if you just flip it over and look at that ingredient list, you can see it may be like the ones I had looked at had about 75 milligrams of sodium, and the ingredient list just said chicken. Now, if you look at the frozen chickens, then that ingredient list is showing chicken, chicken broth, salt, natural flavorings. And on the front of the package, it's still just saying, all natural chicken. So actually look at that ingredient list because that's where the sodium changes, because you can see 75 milligrams of sodium in that regular chicken breast versus 470 milligrams of sodium in some of these frozen, more processed chicken breast.
Because so many of our foods have such a high sodium amount in them, our taste buds have changed over time. So we are drawn to eating more salt. It's one of those things that as you are trying to reduce salt intake, if you have a dramatic drop for, let's say, 3-4 weeks, suddenly foods that tasted amazing to you are way too salty a month later when you have that drop in your salt intake. Keep that in mind. It's something, as you make this adjustment, that you need to give yourself some time for your palate to change. And it usually does, and you'll be able to not have that craving that you might have up front. And it's a great time to think about just using other seasonings instead of salt when you're cooking or buying items that are seasoned with herbs and spices, etc. And you may be wondering, so what's the big deal about salt? Why are we even worried about salt? One of the main chronic conditions that can be impacted by salt intake is high blood pressure. And so a lot of people fall into a category which is what we call salt sensitive, and their blood pressure is very much impacted by the amount of salt intake that they have. And so we have noticed that with this increase in salt intake that is occurring in our diet, we also have a dramatic increase in high blood pressure in general across the U.S. So that's one of the main things. There are other conditions that are impacted by our salt intake, but that is one of the major ones that we link to this higher salt intake.
And then one other thing I wanted to give as far as coming from someone who is a salty tooth person. I've never had a sweet tooth, but I've always loved salty treats. You really can change your taste buds, and it just takes a little bit of trying to get there. So I have tried several things. One thing, I like to snack on nuts, and so a lot of nuts are really high in sodium. So I started just trying to slowly change that. I first just bought totally raw unsalted, and then I was like, oh gosh, yeah, this is not great. So then I started getting some lightly salted and some raw unsalted. So then I mixed that, and then over time I've just slowly mixed in less of the salted nuts and then increased the unsalted nuts. And over time I've just gotten to where that tastes good to me now, and I don't need all the salted nuts. But I had to just do that slowly in order for my taste buds to accommodate and then actually still be able to enjoy it. You can try getting unsalted or low salt versions and then slowly mix that in with what you're used to doing and put other seasonings on it if you need to.
All right. I think we have talked enough about salt. Sorry to bore you on that one topic.
Actually, Sarah, we really must have boredom on that one because I just looked over at the clock and realized we have been talking even longer than I thought. So I think we should take a break and let everyone just digest this part so far.
But make sure you listen to part 2 of this episode because we're going to get into the really good stuff. We're going to talk about added sugars, fiber, and the macros, carbohydrates, protein, fat, and the controversy over seed oil. We hope part 1 of this episode was helpful to you, so check out some food labels, then join us back for part 2 soon, and so you can continue to expand your nutrition knowledge.
Please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify and share this with anyone else you think might benefit from a little nutrition. We'd love to hear from you about any questions or ideas for topics that you would like for us to cover, and you can send those to us at contact@thestartinggatepodcast.com. See you back for part 2.